I'll get this before we're done with remote meetings. This is welcome to the regular school committee meeting of Monday, May 18th, 2020. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. Before we get started with our business agenda tonight, we actually have a public hearing pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 76, Section 12B, subparagraph D. School committee is convening a public hearing on the matter of school choice for the 2020-2021 school year. And then we'll have a regular meeting immediately following the adjournment of the public hearing. So we have through our Zoom meeting, there is a chat content. So if there's anyone if there's anyone who would like to ask any questions or make any statements regarding school choice, I ask that you go ahead and type that into the chat content box. I'll keep the public hearing open for 5 minutes. If we don't have any responses, we'll move on. I'll probably repeat this message a couple times just in case we have any late arrivals. Okay, it's 7:03. I just want to repeat the message in case there are any late viewers or someone watching on Facebook that wasn't around when I made the first announcement. We're in the middle of a public hearing on the matter of school choice for the Attleboro Public Schools. If you would like to make a comment either for or against, or neither for nor against school choice, I ask that you type that comment into the chat function on our Zoom meeting. We're going to keep this public hearing open for another 3 minutes, and then if there are no comments, we will move along with our meeting. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on school choice. Before we get started with our business agenda, just to refresh all our memories, including myself, for the meeting, all votes will be roll call, but also if you have any questions, I ask you just kind of raise your hand. I will be checking in, and if you have a question, I'll call on you at the appropriate time. That way we're not all talking over each other. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Sawyer for the report of the superintendent.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. First, I have some important news that got a little bit lost in the shuffle in the pandemonium back in March. As you all know, that our principal, Tom McDermott for the Attleboro Community Academy, announced that she's retiring this June. And so we had a process to find her replacement. And I have to say it was a very pleasant surprise to find out that we had a very capable leader within the district who wanted to step in and take on this tremendous and important challenge. Through a process that the Assistant Superintendent will describe briefly for you in a moment, we are pleased to announce to you this evening that our own Ms. Jeanne Storrs, Assistant Principal for Unified Student Services at Attleboro High School, will be our next principal of the Attleboro Community Academy. So we're very excited to bring her forward to you tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Regan to talk a little bit about that process.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. So we started the ACA screening process back in February. And we convened a team of both ACA educators and administrators from the district. I do want to take the time to thank them personally for all the time that they dedicated to be a part of that screening committee. The members of that team were Ms. Joanne DePalma, Robbie Willimer, Ms. Lori Scales, Leanne Farrell, Morgan Walsh, Kendall Reingold, Christine Baker, and myself as the facilitator of the actual process. We met twice before the actual interviews began to develop a set of criteria and characteristics that we felt defined or were necessary for a person that was stepping into this role. And we also developed questions from that criteria. From there, we also developed a quite extensive question that all of our candidates had to answer prior to the actual interview, and they had to explain that question, which was a real life scenario, something that would happen actually at the ACA. And so Ms. Hickox came out on top, everyone on the committee recommended her to move forward. And so we are very lucky this evening to have Ms. Hickox be the next candidate, or the next principal of the Attleboro Community Academy. So thank you, Ms. Hickox.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer, Ms. Regan. Thank you, committee, for taking the time for this. I won't keep you. And I too want to echo Ms. Regan and thank that interview committee. I have been on many of those, and blood, sweat, and tears goes into those meetings, usually into the wee hours of the night. So I do appreciate all those people named. I would lie if I said it wasn't bittersweet. I just realized I've been at the high school 22 years, Attleboro 23, and it really is my life's work there. But I'm eager and looking forward to helping the ACA move into its next phase. I was just reminded by a teacher at the high school that she was in my Spanish 1 class as a student when 9/11 happened. And we reminisced about, oh my gosh, we thought, how we got through that and everything and what happened in the school. And wow, I thought we had seen it all. And then 2020 happened. So these things come and happen in our lives, and I think we all grow from them. And while this is not the transition I would have envisioned, Donna Maria and her team have opened their doors, they've opened their hearts, they've helped me. Donna Maria and I plan to work a lot more in June, hopefully, to really solidify some things. I don't think we can underestimate the social emotional component of the work we do. And now more than ever, I dare say, I intend to meet these students where they're at, figure it out from there, and as I say, bring us physically into the new building and standards wise, with the continued support of Dave, Lori, Yvonne, and Julian, 4 humans that I work with quite a bit. I have friends in other districts and they just do not have that. You pick up the phone, if you got a problem, you got a question, you pick up the phone, and those 4 people take my call, and all of central office. So thank you. I also will be part of the transition from the high school, and I'm not going anywhere, so I'll physically be there, thank goodness. And I look forward to working with my successor, who's joining an amazing admin team that I will sorely miss. I would be remiss if I didn't say that, Bill, you've been a support and you've been a friend and you've been a mentor for 7 years and helped me and gave me the courage to take this step, and you encouraged me to do it. We haven't always gotten along and agreed, but I think that's what makes the world go round. We can't all think the same and expect to move forward. So I think we have a lot of shoes to fill around here, but I'd like to think I'm going to bring my own shoes, and I'm very excited and a little bit nervous. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Congratulations, Ms. Hickox. It's good to see a familiar face going into such an important position. So congratulations. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah, Mr. Larson. You're on mute, Bill.
Stepping up into this role, and you're going to be a great addition to the ACA. So I'm looking forward to the transition and into a very successful future. Thank you.
Thank you for your confidence.
Mr. Geddes.
We all need to remember to unmute. It's tricky. Congratulations, Jeanne. I've worked more closely with you outside of my role on school committee, and have seen you do incredible work for a lot of the students, and especially at-risk students, and the passion you have for the success of all of the students in Attleboro. So to echo everyone else's comments, very excited to see you transition into this role and to see where ACA goes. And also thank you to Donna Maria, and congratulations to her on her retirement and for everything she has done, literally building ACA from the ground up. Her losing her presence will be a significant loss to the district, but transitioning you into that role certainly eases that blow. So thank you and congratulations.
Appreciate it and agree.
Any other questions or comments? Yep. Mr. Storrs.
Thank you. Jeanne, you've always impressed me with your energy and passion for this work and for what you do. So I very much commend the committee for their choice. It's sad to see you transitioning out of this, but I'm excited for this opportunity for you and for what you're going to bring to this program. So congratulations. This is a great thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Domenici.
Well, I'd just like to say a couple of things. It's always good when you can, work from a position of strength in an administration to fill such an important role, which I think has happened here. I will say that, when I first joined the school committee, I think my favorite event of that spring was the ACA graduation. It was, just a special moment. These kids are versed in overcoming obstacles to achieve goals. And so my hope is that, these folks were prepared as best as possible, as best as any of us, maybe even for what's going on today. And it's great that they're going to have strong leadership at the top from this point moving forward. So congratulations. I'm glad to see you joining the role. And I do attend the graduation. So we're going to get this name down one way or the other.
I'll start practicing now.
Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Hickox. And again, congratulations, and look forward to working with you some more.
Yes, I have to say, Jeanne and I have shared a work address for over 2 decades now, and we've worked very closely the last 12 years. And the thought of losing Donna Maria, still, I think, Jeanne has echoed that sentiment that that's still a big challenge for us, even though we're lucky to have Jeanne stepping in. Donna Maria is leaving big shoes to fill. And so before we knew that Jeanne was interested in taking this on, I have to tell you, it was a white knuckle affair trying to think of how we were gonna to find somebody. And that Jeanne has stepped in has brought a great deal of relief in many circles. And I just have to say that the time that I've known her, I think of Jeanne as the paragon for competence. So, you know, she's going to bring that to her work at the ACA, and we're just really elated, if you can't tell, that this has worked out for everyone. So thank you, Jeanne, and congratulations.
Thank you all. Be well.
Thank you.
Okay, shifting gears, I have a couple quick things. Today, the governor released new guidelines for the state. Specific ones to the educational setting have not been released as far as I found. My quick look this afternoon, the materials I found referenced that they're coming soon. So whether I missed them or they just don't exist yet, I certainly don't have anything to say about that. But the guidelines for employees were certainly relevant to us because we don't just educate children, we also employ about 700 people on a regular basis. And so, the move today to safer at home and the shift in the easing of restrictions for May 25th coincide nicely with our intention of changing how we're handling the workplace. And we're going to be looking to institute those changes for June 1st, which is conveniently after May 25th. So we'll be working on those details now that we have better guidance from the state as it was released today, and we'll be letting you know exactly how that's going to work. But I can promise you that keeping everybody safe remains job number one, and we're going to make sure that all the policies and procedures in the district, as we start to have people back in the buildings, as we prepare for having students back in the building someday, will all be in accordance with the best thinking about how to do that safely. And we will keep you informed about all of that. I know that there's a couple things related to family still for this school year that are important. I wanted to make you aware of a couple dates. The first is May 22nd, which will be the last day that we hand out any more Chromebooks. As you can imagine, even though we did a massive distribution of Chromebooks back in April, ever since, new people emerge for various reasons saying that they now need one. Other times people had devices and they no longer work or are having problems. And so we've been, there's been a steady trickle of devices going out the door since that day. And, almost every week, certainly every week, almost every building is handing out a decent number of Chromebooks. So we're going to put an end to that on May 22nd because on June 10th, district-wide, we're going to collect all the Chromebooks. We need to get those back to do some routine maintenance. Some are both our 5th and 9th grade Chromebooks, which we had hoped not to need to collect, actually have a recall that we have to do related to their power adapter. So we have to do that work this summer on those Chromebooks. And by reconfiguring, hopefully with money coming in from the CARES Act, we're actually going to be able to position ourselves to have a one-to-one environment for most of the district come the fall. So for all these reasons, we're going to have to collect these Chromebooks, and we're going to be doing that on June 10th. So we'll be telling parents about that day and telling more details about it. But because we're going to be collecting them on the 10th, it doesn't make sense to give Chromebooks out to just turn around and collect them again. So we need to pick a date. We picked the 22nd. After that, we're not going to give out any more. And that'll give us enough time to make sure we understand what's out there and get our lists all set to then turn around and collect them all back on the 10th. And then the last thing as related to families, I know a lot of families are asking about how they're going to get student belongings that are still in the buildings. And in accordance with these new guidelines and assuming that trends continue to improve in Massachusetts, not get worse, we're targeting the week of June 15th to across the district provide opportunities for families to collect their belongings. We'll also be doing step-up activities in grades 4 and 8 specifically. So more details about that to come as well, but just want to let you all know that May 22nd is when we stop handing out the Chromebooks. June 10th is when we collect them all back in. And the week of the 15th will be when we hopefully can create an opportunity where people will be in the building.
Rob?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sawyer, I'm wondering where students will be, at least some students will be bringing some Chromebooks back on June 10th. Does it make sense to spread out the amount of people that are going into all the buildings at different times? Should the folks that are returning Chromebooks also get their belongings?
For returning Chromebooks, we're not going to actually be well, they are going to enter the building to go into the gym to drop them off, but they're not going into the rest of the school. To your point, the number of people involved for that is more than we can manage. For the other opportunities to go in, it's going to be a small subset of the school at any one time. So like at the elementary schools, we'll do a grade at a time. So a grade, kindergarten on Monday, grade 1 on Tuesday. And, these plans are still in the works, so I don't want to get too much into details because they might change between now and then. But we're going to only have a small number of people in the building at any one time. And so combining initiatives on the same day works against that purpose. That's why we want to do Chromebooks on one day and the other stuff another. The other thing is that in case there are people who don't return their Chromebooks, we're looking to hold some leverage to get them back and some time to get them back. So that's why we're doing that a little bit ahead of the other activities.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting having both happen at once entirely. I was saying, if these 20 students at this school are bringing their Chromebook back at that time, should we just have them get their belongings out of their classroom so that they don't have to come back with the rest of their class the following week?
Yeah, no, so to minimize the number of staff that are required, it's better to target one procedure that we have to manage. I think we'll keep employees safe if we aren't trying to do two things at once.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions on that? No?
Okay, and then one other quick thing, I just want to remind everybody that next Monday is Memorial Day, which is a holiday. So next week is a 4-day week. The remote learning plans will be for 4 days. All the activities in the district will be starting on Tuesday. Monday it will be treated as a holiday, and there'll be nothing going on from a district perspective on Monday. All right, so at this point, I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about high school graduation. As I believe you are aware, Mr. Rooney has been working hard, and Mr. Storrs has been nice enough to join that effort. So I'm going to turn it over to them to talk a little bit about the details and where we seem to be headed on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Again, yes, we've been working pretty hard, and I appreciate not only Mr. Storrs being a part of the committee, but also Ms. Hickox is going to stay around for this portion of the presentation. She's been a valuable asset on that committee as well. If I could just press the pause button on graduation for just a second and just take my opportunity to congratulate you, Jeanne, on this promotion. I'm happy for you. As you said, there are times where our passion sometimes got the best of it when we were dealing with certain things, but I think that just ultimately made the high school better. And I'm happy that you're just going to be, a few feet down the hall. So looking forward to, having you in a different role and moving into that new building together. So just a couple of things that I want to mention about graduation, and then Chairman Withers, if it's okay with you, then I'm going to share my screen. I put together a presentation. Well, what I'd like to say to start with is that, we realize that we're not going to be able to give our seniors and their families what they deserve. I've been with this committee before, and I've also been on some other public venues where, we've expressed our heartfelt condolences to our senior class and their families. I am very fortunate to have a team of people at the high school that are working very hard to try to provide some sort of memories for the seniors and their families. We actually had a very upbeat day on Saturday when we gave out caps and gowns, and each car that came through the drive-through was met with a rousing cheering section. And to be able to see those cap and gown photos pop up on Facebook and Instagram later that day certainly made this awful situation that our seniors going through a little bit more palatable. At the conclusion of my presentation, I'll just remind you of a couple of other things that we have coming up for the senior class. But I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So as Mr. Sawyer mentioned, we are very fortunate to have a committee that represents various constituencies. As you can see here, we've got our 4 senior class council officers. We also have 2 senior class parents. As I mentioned, Mr. Storrs and Ms. Hickox have been valuable members of this committee. The senior class advisors, Katie Rigo, who's our events manager, it's her responsibility to coordinate graduation. And then we brought Ms. Colleen Neslin onto the committee as a dean, and she's also a former events manager as well. And then we were fortunate enough to have representation from OIT facilities and our partners at AACS. We felt that it was important that, not knowing exactly what direction we were going to go, that we needed to have as many voices on that committee as possible to make sure that we were leaving no stone unturned in terms of perspective. So this graduation working group was committed to finding ways to make memories for the senior class and for their families. And again, we realized that the priority has been all along to have some sort of in-person ceremony. We realized that in-person ceremony is going to be, an alternative of some sort, and there's no way that we'll be able to make everybody happy, but we are doing the best we can to try to create some sort of memorable experience. We've had 2 very productive meetings, and there's also been a lot of work that has taken place, kind of in the margins before, during, or before and after those meetings. We did come to the realization pretty quickly that, a true stadium ceremony is very unlikely. I was interested to see if the governor had anything to say today about, larger gatherings, and there wasn't any indication that I received from his press conference today that changes the perspective that our committee has had over the course of the first 2 meetings. And so we started considering what our options are. And again, as I've mentioned before, I'm very grateful to many people that are in the community who have offered several different types of ceremonies that are taking place in other states, in other communities. Having a graduating class of 396 students is certainly something that changes the perspective sometimes of what's reasonable and realistic and feasible for us. So as we navigated these 2 meetings, the 3 primary options that we considered were, first of all, a drive-through diploma in-car pickup, where we would seek permission from the city to be able to utilize Capron Park. As Mr. Storrs mentioned, there's a beautiful bridge over there. Creates not only a nice visual, but also has a symbolic impact. There would be pre-recorded speeches from the mayor, the superintendent, the senior class president, valedictorian, salutatorian, and from myself that would be able to be viewed before and after that drive-through ceremony. We also looked at gatherings of cars in a large parking lot, whether it would be, possibly renting a drive-in theater somewhere out of the city, or possibly even using some sort of a setup like at La Salette or other large parking lots in the city with, some sort of blow-up screen or something like that. In that case, the speeches would be on the radio, and or on the large screen, and diplomas would be delivered to the cars. The last option that we considered is a drive-up ceremony, where the student exits the car to receive his or her diploma with their name called by Ms. Hickox in her closing duties at the high school. And those pre-recorded speeches that we mentioned before would be able for view earlier in the day, but also would live on, after the ceremony as well. In our first meeting, understandably, our students, our seniors were a little reflective. We encouraged them by the time our second meeting rolled around to really think about the things that were important for them. And they helped us to develop a set of priorities on behalf of not only their class council, but their classmates as well. They really felt that it was important to be on a stage. And they wanted to have their name called. They think that a photo op is extremely important with them getting their diploma and being able to show that diploma in a photo. And also be able to find some way to at least have their family present. They realized that they would love to have their friends there, but in the world in which we live, at least for the foreseeable future, we've come to realize that that's not realistic. So the consensus that our group came to is that we wanted to explore the possibilities of a drive-up ceremony where a student exits the car to receive the diploma. We would have various school officials there in our graduation robes. There'll be a podium there. Ms. Hickox will call the student's name. We will set up the situation, and I'll describe this with some visuals in just a moment. We'd set up the situation where the family's car would be proximate to the stage so that they would be able to see and hear the student receive the diploma. And our yearbook photographer, Chestnut Hill, is going to take a diploma photo of every graduate. And our gift to the class of 2020 is that we're going to purchase one 8x10 color photo for each graduate, and we're going to make sure that gets to each family. That also helps us a little bit with the fact that some families are understandably going to want to get out of the car. And we're not going to be able to grant them that. So the trade-off is that photo will be made available to them. But I think we have a system set up in such a way where the car is going to be so close to the stage that they'll still be able to get some photos of their student as well. So with the help of our construction team at Consigli, I've put together a couple of diagrams for you. We are going to seek permission from the city and from the construction team to be able to use Highland Park as a car staging area. And as you will see on this diagram, all of the yellow arrows indicate the paths of cars, and the blue arrows indicate the paths of students, so that they will be on foot once they are dropped off. So it's our vision that, with a lot of support from the police department and support from the AHS staff, we will have cars come in shifts down Rathbun Willard, take a left onto Blue Pride Way, cycle through Blue Pride Way to come back to Rathbun Willard, and at that point, right near the child care playground, they will drop their graduate off. So in this next diagram, you get a little bit more of a view of the cars going clockwise on Blue Pride Way, which again, I realize is not the way that we typically drive here in the States, but it facilitates an easier drop off for the families. The students will then walk to the superintendent's entrance along the sidewalk, and we will make sure that we keep them safe from the car traffic. The cars will then navigate the superintendent's parking lot, and we are going to have a stage that is going to be set up at an angle in such a way that the construction of the new building is going to be the backdrop for the photos. I'd like to thank the superintendent for that suggestion, who told me that his entrance is ugly and that we should have a better photo op for our seniors. And so that actually allows us to get more cars in the Bray parking lot to be able to stage and queue up. We will have, police detail and AHS staff members that will make sure that when the student is ready to get on the stage and have their name called, that the parent's car will be right in front of the stage for the family to be able to view, and to possibly take some photos out of the window of the car. The student finishes, they get into their car, family leaves, and they take a left onto Rathman Willard Drive and exit. And this is a photo that I took this morning just to give everyone a sense of where the stage would be and what the backdrop would look like. There are considerations that we still have to work through. As you can see on this first bullet here, we realize that there are some families that do not have cars. And that is something that we are going to have to work through because we want to make sure that we're having something that is equitable as possible. We also have, and this is not a bullet on here, but when we start talking about cars and families, we also have some families that might like to come together in the same car. If they've got the old family truckster type size vehicle from, back in the days of National Lampoon Vacation, maybe they have two families in the same car. And if that's a need that families would like for us to accommodate, then we certainly will make sure that those two graduates, regardless of where they are in the alphabet, will be able to come together. So whether it be, cousins or neighbors, we want to make sure that this is as meaningful for everybody as possible. We will have to work with the residents and also with the police department to make sure that the traffic flow on Rathman Willard Drive is moving only in one direction. And we do also have to make sure that we are building in enough time for cars to cycle through. So it is our plan to have cars come in shifts. I will say that we had a super efficient setup on Saturday with about 25 staff members. Ms. Hickox was there, I was there, and we had students who came onto Blue Pride Way the same way that the diagram is that I've shown you. They went into the Blue Pride Way parking lot, and there was a checkpoint there where they could determine whether or not they had an obligation to pay. If they didn't have an obligation to pay, they went into the express lane and they went right around clockwise to the pit. And our cheering section was there to be able to provide them with their cap and gown, and they got a rousing cheer and then they left. If they did need to pay an obligation, then we had a team there with tables. We had basically a contactless type setup where, all of our staff members were in gloves and masks. Books could be left on the hood on the roof of the car, and we could come back and pick it up. And then they still were able to cycle through pretty quickly to get their cap and gown. At one point, we had done 150 cars in 90 minutes. So we were averaging, less than a minute per car. Now, I realize that that's not going to be quite the same as the setup that we have here for graduation. There's a little bit more pomp and circumstance to it. We don't want it to be, like trying to herd cattle or anything like that. But, Blue Pride Way is a pretty lengthy runway. And I think our first wave of folks would just be told to come directly to Blue Pride Way, and we would just queue them up. And so when the ceremony starts, those cars wouldn't have to migrate down Rathman Willard from the construction parking lot. They would just already be on Blue Pride Way. And then as we saw that wave of cars start to diminish, then we would bring the next wave from the Highland parking lot. And if we end up with a little bit of a lag because we were so efficient, then gives us a chance to catch our breath and just wait for the next group. So I'll just pause there for a second. Let me stop sharing my screen. So I'll pause there for a second. First of all, to see Mr. Storrs or Ms. Hickox, if there's anything that you want to, add to what I had to say, and then see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I do want to commend our student leaders that were part of the committee. They represented the class extremely well. They're the ones that came back and said that they talked to their fellow students and that they're the ones that really wanted the ability to walk across the stage and to experience that. So I think that of the three options, this is definitely the better option. I was hopeful today in watching the governor that maybe, late summer there'd be a possibility, but because it wasn't specifically addressed, I mean, we could hope, but as we talked about, I think it's important to mention, Mr. Rooney, that we did talk about the possibility of trying to postpone this into August, and in the hopes of having a more of a stadium type ceremony. But the full committee felt that the odds of that happening is extremely low, even with the phases defined by the governor today. So I think it would still be lower than what we would really hope for. And then the timing, if doing it earlier, and I know you haven't talked about the timing yet, which you will in a minute, but doing it earlier, there's a lot of benefits. There are those who will be joining the military who would miss out. There are those who may be away or for whatever that would miss out. So by having it earlier, and again, I know Mr. Rooney will be speaking to that. I'm not trying to take away your thunder there, but I felt that the committee made the right decision to go with this more safer route in an earlier time frame. So I wanted to commend everybody, and especially the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. My next slide does talk about timeline, but from a logistical standpoint, or from the process of the committee, or the graduation working group, are there any other questions I can answer? Mr. Geddes?
Not so much a question, but more a comment, because very early on, Mr. Storrs and I had a conversation about his idea of what this would look like. And Mr. Rooney, you mentioned involving Capron Park and a lot of that. But over the weekend, we actually had family in the Midwest in a state that I will say is more open than Massachusetts is right now. And this is exactly what they did. And I literally thought to myself as I was looking at pictures today, man, I wish I had seen this before before Jim went to Bill with that idea. So I think this has a lot of potential of capturing a lot of what the concerns are that the students had, and still providing the best possible scenario we can have. And it, in a way, it almost gives families more access to the stage. Usually the families are 20, 30 yards away in the bleachers or at a bad angle. This puts them right up against the stage, which I think may be a benefit as well. And thank you for all your hard work.
We saw this being utilized in Milton. They are going to do it on June the 7th, I believe. And Ms. Rigo is going to, she's going to find someone to connect with up there so that we can see if there's the ability for us to view this via cable access, or if nothing else, she's going to be able to find somebody to talk with on June the 8th to be able to debrief. Okay, I'll go back to sharing my screen again for the last couple of slides. Just give me a second. So as Mr. Storrs mentioned, our committee, was hopeful that we would get some guidance by now that would give us some additional hope for having something later in the summer. But we did come to realize that for various reasons, it was probably best for our committee to come to you tonight to make a recommendation for having this ceremony in June. We have a lot of students each year who are going to serve our country in the military. Waiting for late July or August excludes them from the ceremony. And again, if we felt that we would be able to have something more traditional in late July or August, that would have been under strong consideration. But we've all been very realistic about that being almost not going to happen. So the other thing is that families need closure. Some families with smaller groups are able to start planning some graduation parties and things like that. And, I have talked to, a few of my friends in the community that, have said that, their time with their family to be able to see their graduate, but also to be able to have some sort of socially distant graduation party, a small group of less than 10 is what they're really looking forward to. So if we do have the ceremony in June, as opposed to waiting to have the same ceremony in late July or August, then it does allow folks to be able to move on mentally and to be able to, check this box off. And also, realistically, we do have more staff volunteers that are available to us in June because school is still in session. So what we would like to propose is to have this hybrid ceremony, which again is going to be a drive-up ceremony with the pre-recorded speeches that will start earlier in the day, but will also be available for anybody to view at any point in time through AACS's portals. We are proposing Thursday, June 11th at 5 p.m. And if we have inclement weather, then we would move it to Friday the 12th. And then if not, in order to be able to keep our costs down and have a higher likelihood of getting volunteers, we would then look as a last resort Monday the 15th.
Any other questions on this?
Steve, I have a question.
Oh, Jim, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, Bill, I know we haven't talked about this in the committee. Two questions, actually. Because for myself, the graduation is one of the most anticipated things that I look forward to every year. I'm sure many of the other committee members would agree with that. Can you give us some idea what you think that our involvement, if at all, if that's possible, would be? And then the second one is parents have approached me and was wondering if a DVD of the pre-recorded speeches as well as the ceremony is something that might be something we could do for the families.
So to answer your first question, we always value the school committee's participation at the ceremony. I think we need to see what Milton is doing to be able to get some guidance from them. Also, we have to look and see what our setup is. We're going to have a logistical meeting, pending your approval tonight to move forward. We're going to have a logistical meeting soon to be able to see what that would look like. Obviously, everyone's safety is our biggest priority. And from the standpoint of efficiency, the more students that we have lined up in the Bray Auditorium parking lot, the faster that the ceremony will go. So, that's a pretty big area behind the stage, between the stage and the construction site that, people who are interested in being able to be there should be able to stand. But I can't necessarily commit to that at this point. To commit to what it looks like. I am committed to having you all there in some form or fashion. As far as a DVD, we're already putting out probably close to $4,000 for the photos. And the ceremony is going to be on YouTube, for perpetuity. I'm not really sure exactly how beneficial a DVD is in the long run, but in terms of the more bang for our buck, in terms of the money that we're willing to spend, I think the photo might be more palatable for families than a DVD.
Any other questions?
I'll just add that, currently we're not allowed to have gatherings of larger than 10 people. And so I do think that complicates your physical involvement on the night of the ceremony. And I think, it's a very fair point. How are we going to, we obviously wish to do. So that's something that we can definitely work on and get back to you on. But, for this, the staging area, right? You put the student, the couple of people that have to be involved. There's not a lot of room for a lot more people to keep it under that number, which is unlikely to change between now and then. So we definitely have some work to do to figure out how to get that right.
Do you need a motion from us to approve this plan so you can continue on planning it for the 11th?
That would be very helpful if
Sure.
it pleases the committee.
All right. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to approve the proposed graduation plan for June 11th, 2020, as presented by Principal Rooney.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Principal Rooney and Mr. Storrs and the committee for putting that all together.
Chairman Withers, if I may, I do want to just pass on two reminders to the committee. Ms. Hickox and I went to AACS today to record Scholarship Night, and that is going to premiere on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. We're giving away almost $300,000 of aid to our senior class. And that is also going to be an exciting night because the valedictorian and salutatorian of the class of 2020 will be named at the conclusion of the ceremony. And also very grateful to Chief Hegney, who is supporting us with the Blue Pride Parade, which is scheduled for the original graduation night of May 29th at 6 p.m. We're still working out a lot of the logistical details, but we're hoping to have a lot of Blue Pride on display that night as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rooney. It's certainly been a lot to untangle, and it feels good to have some direction, and we look forward to bringing it to fruition. We have a couple more quick updates for the committee tonight. So starting with teacher learning, we'll go to Assistant Superintendent Regan.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. I know I start every meeting by saying thank you to everyone that continues to make remote learning a reality, but to all of our families, our students, our ed teachers, and all of the staff that continues to make it what it is for our students. I just want to say thank you. As we continue to move forward with the remote learning, the last plan for the year will be sent home to families on June 5th. The plan will be a 2-week plan, and it will also include a review of our summer packet So the packet will contain a listing of enrichment activities, and teachers will be including information about the packet and an opportunity for the students to actually dive into the packet, take a look at it, and possibly start some of the activities that are written inside of the packet. So again, one more final date that we needed to share with you. June 5th will be the last date for the remote learning plans, and that plan will be for 2 weeks. So it encompasses many of the dates that Superintendent Sawyer spoke about at the top of the meeting, with June 10th being the day to return the Chromebooks, and that following week being the days when there'll be step-up days and days to collect your belongings. So anyone have any questions about where we are with learning right now? Mr. Domenici?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, kudos to everybody who's this is as a parent of 3, it's been a bit of a challenge, right? And I can only imagine what it takes to put these together. I guess my question simply is, like, for these last couple of weeks, if students are using Chromebooks, and in many instances, like, submitting your work online is kind of been what they're doing, what would the expectations then be, I guess, for that last 2-week packet, if these don't have a Chromebook to use?
Right. So the last date to submit anything will be on June 8th and 9th. And then anyone who has the ability to either email or take a picture of something and send it with their phone, they would be able to do that during the following week. But we recognize that there will be some students that may not be able to do that, but we encourage them to communicate in any way that they possibly can during that last week. And hopefully we'll be able to see some of the students during that week when they come to pick up their belongings as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Porto?
Yeah, I was wondering if families have the capability of being able to log on to Lexia, ST Math, Freckle throughout the summer. Will they have that opportunity to do that?
Yeah, so all of the platforms that you just named, so Lexia, ST Math, everything will be open throughout the summer, and all of those links will still be live. They'll be in the remote learning packet or the summer enrichment packet that everyone will be receiving in that last week. So there'll be those links and more.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, moving along, for an update on special education, we have our Director of Special Education, Ms. Medeiros.
Good evening. So I have 4 updates. We started the next kind of piece of special education a couple of weeks ago. We've started remote team meetings, and we've had, I did one today, a little bit different, but once we get into the discussion during the team meeting, it certainly goes smooth. So we've gone ahead and done those for families. I just want to remind families that we need written agreement to actually hold a remote team meeting. So families are receiving an email from us asking for that written agreement. If they could respond to those when they receive those, that would be extremely helpful. We cannot set them up without that parent agreement. We are also today, I notified families this afternoon. Again, we were hoping to get further guidance today from the governor. That didn't happen, particularly around extended school year. So on Friday, DESE's guidance was to go ahead and plan for remote learning for extended school year, and to have a contingency plan for later in the summer if further guidance were to come, to see if we could open. So we took the guidance from DESE. We also looked at the recent CDC guidance that was provided last week for schools. We also conferred with our local health authorities, and we've decided that just to help families plan, we're going to do remote learning for ESY over the summer. I notified families today. We asked them to fill out a parent survey, which included if they have technology, if that technology is one of our Chromebooks, one of our devices. Also, special ed has lots of other devices out there for kids. And if they needed one over the summer, because if it is one of our devices, we will not be collecting those. Families will keep those if they're participating in extended school year. Will be remote. Extended school year will be the same dates as per the IEPs. And we'll be beginning that on July 6th. The third update is we do have one slight program change for next school year, and that's our Spark program at the elementary level. Currently, it's a K-2 at Thatcher with a 3 to 4 at Willett. Next year, it will be K-1 at Thatcher and 2 to 4 at Willett. Families have been notified, staff has been notified. We're doing a parent meet and greet remotely through Zoom with the Willett staff and Principal Caton, so they can ask questions and get to meet the teacher over there and kind of hear a little bit about Willett. Very different than the way we normally do it, but we went ahead and scheduled that. And then my final update is, as you all know, Tim Trout-Savino, our Assistant Director of Special Education, is retiring at the end of this school year. We just completed a pretty comprehensive interview process, and I'm pleased to announce that we have a new Assistant Director. Her name is Katie I'm going to try it again. Katie Sliskowski. She's currently in the Randolph Public Schools. She will be being introduced to the school committee at a later date. So thank you. I don't know if you have any questions.
Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on and get an update from Ms. Singer, our Director of HR.
Good evening. Thank you. I just have a couple of quick updates for this evening. We finally have our evaluation for our staff figured out. We were kind of waiting to see if we were coming back or not, and how we were going to be evaluating our teachers and what that process would look like, as well as our paras and clerical staff. So that's figured out. So we're letting them know how that's going to play out for the rest of the year and what they can expect for the evaluation process for the year. We started negotiations back up, so we are plugging along with that still, going quite well via Zoom. And as Superintendent Sawyer mentioned early on in his report, we're looking at and planning for our slow transition back for staff starting the week of June 1st. So we'll have more details around that in the coming week. And that's it, unless anybody has any other questions for me. Thank you.
All right, we're going to attempt to finish strong here with a conversation on the budget, both FY20 and 21. He didn't make the list of humans, but we still think very highly of him. I'll turn it over to Mr. Furtado.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and good evening. A few things. We continue to do thorough disinfecting and cleaning of the schools, especially touch points. We're going to have a sort of a policy manual to hand out to the buildings to explain what their expectations can be in terms of cleaning, what our approach is, what the process is, and if there are any concerns, who to contact about anything with regard to the buildings in the context of, starting to reopen a little bit. We're also very hard at work trying to close out the current year. We've got a lot of work to do with closing POs with nobody in the building. That can't be done remotely, so people have to come in and start doing that work. So I could tell you, what it looks like now in the financial system, but it's guaranteed not to be accurate. And I'd rather wait until we have a little better sense of what's going on. I can assure you we're going to have substantial surpluses, both in operating and transportation. Through the Finance Committee, we were throughout the year for 20 talking about being very, very close. We're starting to get a little room as some of the POs that were encumbered by departments get closed out. And as that continues, it'll grow. I just don't know at what rate. For 21 is still just that planning. We haven't gotten any direction, indication, idea on what 21 is going to look like in any real way. So we are sticking with the budget that the school committee has seen. It was based on the governor's presentation in January, and hope that comes through. So we are, as the superintendent explained earlier on, going through planning with OIT on both anticipating being in a position of 1-to-1 at middle school and high school at a minimum in September, and then also on how to best deal with the return of the Chromebooks and making sure everything is operational and working. And that concludes my report.
Mr. Furtado, what's the timeline for the 2021 budget? I know it's obviously very different than the years past, so just trying to get an idea.
We were told by the city that they were trying to march to their normal timeline, which would I think have them present a budget next week, which I doubt they're going to do. We haven't heard a thing about that. I do believe that they are, the number they're writing down for us is that number that we were working with in January. I haven't heard a thing about that changing. So, but the state hasn't done anything, said anything, and to speculate is just. It's just not clear enough at this time to do that.
Any other questions for Mr. Furtado? Rob?
Sorry. On the agenda, it had mentioned vendors. So I wasn't sure if you were going to talk in more detail about transportation or lunch. So if you were, I'll shut up now, but if not.
No. A couple of things regarding transportation. We've got some stuff coming out of the finance report. There have been a series of agreements throughout the state for transportation service providers. One of them is a very broad agreement across 14 communities that are partners or members of the BICO collaborative regarding van pool and special ed transportation, which calls for a 78% payment, 78% of the normal rate from mid-March through the end of the year. That was signed today by BICO, which puts us in an interesting position. So technically, we're bound by that agreement. However, state law supersedes that, and since we're not getting services, what we're going to do is just kind of toss it over the fence to the city and let the auditor wrestle with it. I think most communities are going to try to honor that agreement. So it's a discount, not a big one. And we'll see what happens. With Bloom, there were 6 districts in the state of Massachusetts that use Bloom, and somehow I was elected to negotiate with Bloom, which I did, and that outcome was a 30% payment as opposed to a 78% payment. That basically reflects the capital expense that they incurred for the contract, and that was reached, and we have a contract amendment for that. But it's subject to the same circumstance as the van pool agreement. They're not providing services, so the city is certainly within their legal rights to say you're getting nothing. Finally, Whitson's, we've hit a little bit of a plateau in terms of number of lunches served every day. So we're looking at something at around a cost of about $50,000 to $60,000 for the program since the middle of March, and we're looking at reimbursements that are going to be something around 40. So it's going to be an expense to the district, to the food service program, but a small one, and one that is within the confines of the school lunch budget.
So for families that have made payments either for transportation or food? Should they expect any type of reimbursement for the services, or is that still to be determined by whatever legal battle comes through the city?
No, that's a completely separate thing. So we have sent out a communication to families of seniors, instructing them that they had a bunch of options to any kind of positive lunch balance. They could request a return of their money. They could gift it to the school lunch program to give to students who need it. So they've received that letter and instructions at this point for students who are not returning. The students who do return, it's a pretty common practice to carry a balance into the new year. And again, if circumstances change and families need that money, we will certainly provide it to them. But usually those balances are pretty modest and just carry over into the new year. And as far as transportation goes, remarkably, March 16th, which was the first day that we were shut down because of the virus, was the 120th day of the school year. So it divided itself very nicely into a third. So families who paid fee-for-service for the third trimester essentially will receive a trimester's worth of credit in September, should things be, and that communication will be going out sometime this week. That has
and that communication will include if they would prefer to get the refund, what those steps are, similar to the lunch. Perfect. Yep. Thank you very much.
Well, if there are no other questions, that concludes my report.
Okay. Next item on our agenda for tonight is school choice. We had a public hearing at the start of the meeting with no participation on the issue of school choice. And before we take up that question, I'll turn it over to the administration for their recommendation to the school committee.
So it is the recommendation of the administration that we do not participate in school choice. As I believe the committee is fully aware, the realization of the implications of how school choice is run, which was a benefit to our participation this year. We, by participating, we got in behind the curtain and sort of saw how it all worked and had the realization that it is not a good match for a district with a comprehensive high school, that there are better ways to maximize the value of our CTE programs, and that we would be really undercutting that by participating in school choice. So, Ms. Regan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Oh, thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. I believe we discussed this at a subcommittee meeting as well. And I also think with the addition of the innovation pathway, which will be starting next year, that gives us another opportunity similar to the CTE and another reason why we should not participate in school choice moving forward for next year.
Is it correct language opting out of school choice? The correct terminology?
Yeah, it assumes that we are participating in it. So withdraw our participation or opt out, I think could work.
All right. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to withdraw our participation in school choice for the 2020-2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion or comments? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'll start a roll call vote. Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
All right. Motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is a resolution that was circulated with your packet. This is based on a resolution that the City of Boston School Committee put forward, and several school departments our school committees throughout the state, especially those in more urban areas, have been passing this similar resolution. It is a resolution in support of increased federal support and stimulus funding for public K through 12 education, dated May 18th, 2020. And so at this time, I'd entertain a motion to pass the resolution that was circulated with your materials.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or comments? All right, not seeing any. I'm going to go backwards this time. Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Resolution passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda tonight, we have minutes from our April 27th, 2020 meeting. The draft minutes were circulated with your materials. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or edits? All right, not seeing any. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
thank you. All right. Next, we have our consent agenda. There are a few items. So what I'm going to do is similar to how we did it last time. I will I'll take the motions, the donations as one motion. I will read the various donations at the end. I'll request a motion and a second, and then do a roll call vote. So we have a motion to accept the donation of $120 from Kim Souza for prom tickets to the Attleboro High School gifts donation line. A motion to accept a donation of $5 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts gifts donation line. Motion to accept a donation of $4 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts gifts donation line. And a motion to accept a donation of $6.90 school lunch balances from Janet amount to the Attleboro Public Schools lunch program to help resolve outstanding student lunch balances.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All right, seeing none. Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. That concludes our consent agenda. Moving on, next we have subcommittee reports. And for that, I'll turn over finance and budget to Mr. Larson to report on the May 6th meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. The Budget and Finance Subcommittee met Wednesday, May 6th. Mr. Furtado took us through the monthly budget reports, and as his report earlier stated, it does appear that we will end the year with a positive balance, although at this time we don't know the extent of that. We had an MSBA update. The high school project continues to be on schedule and on budget. At this time, the Brennan and Wamsutta roof projects are still on schedule. And the Hyman Fine and Hill Robert floor projects are temporarily on hold from what we've been told. And basically that's just pending the bonding that needs to happen in order to pay for those projects. From there, we went to FY21 budget update. The challenge there is that the city has to have its budget in place before the state really comes down with their number, which is not expected to come until sometime in July. So, you know, the plan, as Mr. Furtado outlined before, is that we're going to continue to go with the number that we've been working with all spring. But there is a little bit of a wait and see that's going to happen once the dust settles in July at the state level. There's a number of motions that we're going to bring forward tonight. But before we get to that, I didn't know if there are any questions. I don't know if you see any questions. I don't see any questions.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, well, then we'll go
Looks
forward.
like you're all set, Bill.
All right, we'll go forward with the motions. The first is to recommend to the full committee to allow the budget director to make the necessary first close out the fiscal year 2020. So
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? It's just an annual motion that we need to make in order to close out the year. Okay. Mr. Chairman, do you want to do the roll call vote?
Sure. Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next motion to come forward is a recommendation to the full committee to approve the license agreement between the district and Abacus for the next, FY 2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion or questions? Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next is recommendation to the full committee to approve the renewal of the license agreement with the Smarts Collaborative for the FY 21 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any questions or concerns? Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next entertained direct committee to approve the renewal of the first one-year renewal option on the current Bloom contract for the FY 21 school year.
So moved.
Second.
All right. This is, as I said, the first of the one-year options on the current Bloom contract. It's a 5-year contract, so this would theoretically be year 4. Are there any questions? Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next one, as Mr. Furtado made mention on during his report, there have been some negotiations that have been going back and forth between districts and their transportation contractors. We have an agreement with Bloom at this time to pay 30% the contract for the time that we were out of school, and not, so we'd only be paying 30% out of the full cost, which was negotiated by Mr. Furtado. This is not exactly a legally binding. I mean, it is an agreement that we've gone into in good faith, but it is still pending the city's approval. So at this time, we are recommending to the full committee that we approve the memorandum of agreement with Bloom and the Attleboro Public Schools to pay 30% of the fee while we were out of school.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, is this only from the March until June timeframe?
Yes.
So what about over the summer?
The summer contract is in place pending, depending on what summer.
So we would expect there would be a new negotiation that would take place in the future. Is that correct?
That's the understanding.
So the agreement is for the duration the schools are closed down.
Okay, that's.
So yeah, so I think we're still not even sure what's going to happen with ESY in that regard. At this point, I feel terrible for Yvonne because that's just an enormous amount of work. But if schools are closed, this agreement's in place. If school reopens, even with split sessions, social distancing, all that kind of stuff, this would be null and void. We'd be paying the full fare.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado. Are there any other questions or concerns? Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes.
Thank you. The next, we had a discussion about the price of school lunches. As you know, the prices of school lunch and school lunches are controlled and regulated by the United States Department of Agriculture. They have a spreadsheet that you basically, the short version of the story is you have to put your cost structure in. You have to put what you're paying for meals. They come up with a ratio to make sure that the costs and what you're paying are applicable and are within their guidelines. We've not had to move prices in the last few years, but based on the guidelines and the regulations at this time, we do feel that we need to, in order to stay within the guidelines from USDA, we are recommending to the full committee for the FY21 school year that elementary school lunches are $2.50, middle school lunches are $3, and the high school lunches are $3.50. And Mr.
moved.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. Furtado, if you correct me, we really are only increasing one of the school levels by 25 cents. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we had to, you have to reach a average lunch price, and that is in contrast to the reimbursement the federal government gives for free and reduced meals. And the point is, your average lunch price has to be high enough to prevent the district from using the reimbursement to subsidize regular lunches. So that's where the target comes from. Our target in this case was $3. with a third of the district at each level, just the high school only to get to where we needed to be.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or concerns? Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and our last motion to bring forward is to recommend to the full committee the approval of first one-year renewal option on the current Sodexo contract.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or concerns? Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to just thank everybody, both in Mr. Furtado's office and the different offices around the district. It was a very challenging time, obviously, to try to close up school. They're all doing a great job. I'm in to look at different things, usually on a weekly basis with them, and a very difficult way to do a lot of work. So I just personally like to thank all of them for all of their efforts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Next, we have our Policy and Personnel Subcommittee report. Mr. Storrs will report on the May 11th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the committee met. The first section that we worked on was our 3-year review of sections H and sections L. Because of the roll call vote, the way I'll do it is I'll go through those 2 sections as a group, and if there's no opposition, I'll look to approve them all at once. All of the policies tonight have been voted out of the subcommittee unanimously, so they will be brought right before the full committee. Policy HA, negotiation goals. Our policy aligned with MASC. There were no recommendations from the administration to make a change, so we're looking to note the review date. Policy HB, negotiations legal status, the same. It aligns with the MASC policy, and we're looking to note the review date. Policy HBA, contractual MOAs, MOUs, and amendments. MASC does not have this policy, so we did discuss that, but ultimately the administration felt that we should maintain that policy as we do utilize MOAs, MOUs, and amendments for negotiations for other purposes. So we're looking to note the review date, keep the policy as is. Policy HF, school committee negotiation agents. Again, the policy aligns with the MASC version, so we're looking to note the review date. Policy LA, education agency goals. Our policy aligns with MASC. We're looking to note the review date. Policy LB, relations with other schools in school districts. Again, we align with MASC, looking to note the review date. Policy LBC, relations with non-public schools. Again, we align with MASC, looking to note the review date. And policy LDA, student teaching and internships. We align with MASC, and we're looking to note the review date. Are there any questions, discussion regarding any of the policies? Seeing none. So all of these policies, again, have been voted out unanimously from the subcommittee. So we have a motion to approve all of these policies as just discussed. I will call the roll call vote. Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Chairman Withers?
Yes.
Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
And Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Thank you. All those policies will note the review date. And moving on, the next section, we were continuing with the mask newsletter that we've been working on since the beginning of the year, the January newsletter. A lot of different changes. We did have a discussion regarding the residency policy. It was requested by one of our members to take a look at that policy. We held a discussion. We talked about the frequency, the timing in which we verify residency, not only for our new students in kindergarten, but per policy, there are other times throughout the year where that needs to be done. We are going to be further discussion is going to be held on that policy in an upcoming meeting. Policy JH, student absences and excuses. We're looking to align that with the mask policy. Policy JIH, it aligns with mask. We're looking for formatting to align with mask.
It's JICH,
Yep.
Mr. Storrs.
Sorry, JICH. Yep, so thank you. JICH, alcohol, tobacco, and drug use by students prohibited. We're right, we're looking to align that through formatting with mask. Policy JIH, there it is, which is search and interrogations. We're looking to note the review date, keep the policy as is. And policy JJIF, head injury and concussion policy. Again, the policy is written specifically for what we do in the district, so we're looking to note the review date. Is there any discussion regarding the Section J policies that I just reviewed? Seeing none, if there's no opposition, I will put them all up for approval. And seeing none. So I'll do it in reverse order. Mr. Gettis.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Ms. Porter.
Yes.
Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
And Ms. Sword.
Yes.
Thank you. The last thing that on the agenda for that evening was the handbooks for the 2020-2021 school year. Each of the members should have received a memorandum that outlined the differences between the current handbooks and the new handbooks. I'll give a update, summary, and then I will ask the administration if I missed anything. So generally, some civil rights language is being updated per the laws. The remind and be heard information is being added to the handbooks, and information regarding student IDs. Ms. Regan or Ms. Singer, if you could just verify or discuss if anything I might have missed.
No, that was it for all of them. And then there was some specific things for the other levels too.
Okay, could you review those for me real quick?
Sure. So at the elementary level, we were including information or actually the names of the new assistant principals for the screening processes that we're holding right now. And there is some updated information for immunizations for students are entering into grade 7 and grade 11. And there were some updates to some of the discipline information that was located for under the conduct in the handbook.
Thank you, Ms. Regan. Is there any questions regarding the changes to the handbooks? So again, that information was provided to the members. So the motion that is coming forward from the subcommittee is to approve the changes to the handbooks as provided in the memorandum for the 2020-2021 school year. I'll put that up to vote. Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Chairman Withers.
Yes.
Ms. Porto.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Domenici.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Hill.
Yes.
And Mr. Geddes.
Yes.
Thank you. The next meeting for the policy subcommittee is Monday, June 1st. And that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my update.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Next, we have open forum. If there's anyone who would like to address the committee at open forum, I'd ask that you use the chat function on the Zoom meeting. And I'll keep it open for a minute, although I don't see any participants, but just in case. Okay, I'll go ahead and close open forum. At this time, the Attleboro School Committee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A2 and A3 to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. The school committee will not reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Second.
Just briefly for discussion purposes, as in the past meeting, Ms. Singer sent a link to a Zoom meeting for the executive session. So once the vote's taken and we're adjourned, members can sign off this meeting and then enter into the other executive session meeting. Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mrs. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned, and I'll see you all in a couple minutes in executive session. Thank you.
Thanks.